Hello everyone, thanks for joining us again today here at the Caribou Public Library for our chapter book story time. I'm Miss Erin and I'm glad that you are here. So we're continuing to read Little Britches by Ralph Moody. We're on chapter 30, pretty close to the end, so we'll go ahead and see what happens today. Chapter 30 is called We Move to Littleton. We moved to Littleton between Christmas and New Year's. Father and Mother found a 7-room house on the south edge of town, and Fred Altland helped us move. There was a barn and a chicken house and a little piece of ground where we could have a garden. Besides King, we took Lady, Babe, and the chickens with us. We didn't live very far from the schoolhouse, and Mother took us over the first day after New Year's. It seemed to us like an awfully big school. There was a separate room for each grade. After the principal had asked us some questions and had us read to him, he put Grace in the 8th grade and me in the 6th. Muriel went into the 4th grade and Philip in the 2nd. Starting school in Littleton wasn't a bit like starting at the ranch. Of course, I didn't know any of the kids, but they all knew who I was. I guess there'd been something in the paper about my writing in the roundup. It was right after we moved to Littleton that Father was made boss on the house building job. I don't think I ever saw him more pleased about anything. He told us about it one night when we were eating supper. I knew he had been worrying about the house because I had heard him tell Mother the framing wasn't true, and there'd be trouble when they went to put the roof on. That night at supper, he told us the owner had come out and caught them splicing rafters that had been cut too short. Mother took a quick little breath and said, "Charlie, does that mean?" Father looked up and smiled. "Yes, that means," he said, "that he made me boss carpenter. I'm getting $4 a day, and I know I can make a good job of it." He took a couple more mouthfuls, and then he looked up again. "How does that line near the end of Hamlet go? The one about there being a divinity?" Mother knew them all, I guess. She got tears in her eyes and in her voice, too. "There's a divinity that shapes our ends. Rough hew them how we will," she repeated. Father nodded. "That's the one. How do you remember them all?" I think that pleased her as much as the $4 a day. I had gone to school in Littleton about 6 weeks before I got into any big trouble. The teacher in our room was a widow. She was almost a Mrs. Corcoran type of woman. I don't think she ever said anything nice if she could find a way to say it mean. The only times she was really pleasant were when Mr. Purdy brought eggs and butter to her. Mr. Purdy was a widower who lived 4 or 5 miles up the Platte River, and he used to bring the eggs and butter during school. Sometimes they would stand at the door of the schoolroom for nearly half an hour, whispering and giggling. Mr. Purdy came to the door one day in February, just after recess, and just after they had put new gravel on the schoolyard. The yard was wet, and we had all lugged gravel in on the soles of our shoes. When Mr. Purdy had talked with Mrs. Upson for nearly 15 minutes, one of the boys started to scuff his feet back and forth. Inside of a minute, everybody in the room was scuffing, and it sounded like 40 steam engines all puffing at once. Mr. Purdy left in a hurry, and Mrs. Upson went flying out after him. She was back in 2 minutes with the principal, but the room was as quiet as if it had been empty. The principal was a big, handsome man with wavy brown hair and red cheeks. I don't suppose he was more than a year or so younger than Father, probably 32 or 3, but he didn't look within 10 years of being as old. He stood up in front of the class and clapped his hands. He said, "I want all the children who scraped their feet to stand up." Dutch Gunther was the first one up, and his brother, Bill, was right behind him. And when I looked around, there were 7 of us boys standing and not a single girl. There must have been 30 of us in the class, and if the principal had bothered to look, he could have seen scratch marks on the floor under every desk. He folded his arms and glared at us for a couple of minutes. Then he said, "I might have known, the worst boys in the whole school. You follow me." He marched out of the room like one of the drill sergeants over at Fort Logan, and we marched after him. When we were going through the coat corridor, Dutch whispered back to me, "Don't let him make you holler, Little Britches." He led us down to a room in the basement and took a whip off of a hook on the wall. It was a mean-looking whip. It was like a bullwhip, except that it was only about 1.5 feet long, and it had 3 cattails at the end. Bill got 14 licks before he hollered, and 3 afterwards. I didn't do so well. I had cracked a couple of ribs at the time we lost Fanny, and knobs had grown over the cracks. First time he swung the whip, the cattails hit right over the knobs, and it felt as if I were being stabbed by a dozen broken bottles. I thought Mother would go wild when I got home. She would have gone right over to the schoolhouse if I hadn't told her. It would only make it worse for me. She washed the places where the cracker cut through my skin, put some salve on it, and put me to bed. Afterwards, she brought me up some brandy with sugar and water, but it didn't taste as good as it used to, and my back was so sore I had to lie on my stomach. She must have told Father as soon as he got home from work. He hadn't been in the house more than a few minutes when I heard him coming up the stairs. After he said, "Hello, son," he turned down the bedclothes and looked at my back. I couldn't have told by the sound of his voice or what he said, but I knew he was mad because those muscles at the sides of his jaws were working out and in. After he'd looked at all the welts, he said, "Gave you a good one, did he? Well, you've been hurt worse than this and got over it. I guess you'll live. Let's get some clothes on and go down to supper." While I was dressing, he sat on the edge of my bed and said, "You know, son, sometimes a fellow has to take a licking for doing the right thing. A licking only lasts a short while, even if it's a hard one. But failing to do the right thing will often make a mark on a man that will last forever. Let's go down to eat." Father's house was pretty near finished, and at supper he said that there would only be about another week's work, but a man had come to see him about building another, and he was going to start on it on the 10th of March. He talked more at supper than I heard him for a long time, but he didn't say a word about my getting a whipping at school. Grace started to say something about it, but he kept right on talking about the house, so she had to keep still. Mother sent us all to bed as soon as the dishes were done, but I couldn't go to sleep. I must have lain there about an hour when I heard Father go out the front door. It was about an hour before I heard him come back. He called to me to get up at the regular time in the morning, and when we were eating breakfast, I noticed that his hands were all swollen up and dark-looking across the backs. I wondered what he'd been doing, because I was sure I would have noticed if they had been swollen like that when he was talking to me the night before. I thought I could figure it out if I could find out where he had been, so I asked him if I didn't hear him go out somewhere. He was wiping syrup off his plate with a piece of hot biscuit and said, "Oh, I just had to go see a fellow about a dog." Mother looked up quickly and said, "I think you got it backwards." But Father was just kept on wiping up the syrup. Grace had gone back after school and got my coat and cap. Mother didn't say anything about not going to school, so I went. I think I must have gone past the principal's office, 7 or 8 times that day, but I never saw him. The door of his office was always open, but he was never in there. He wasn't there for several more days either. The kid said somebody had given him an awful beating, but I guess I was the only one who ever had an idea who the somebody was. I never even told Grace. Father finished his house on the 5th of March. I remember the date as well as if it had been yesterday. Ever since we had moved to Littleton, Father had been planning to fix Mother's chicken house, but he was never home in daylight except on Sundays. The first day after his job was finished, he started on our chicken house. I went out to help him as soon as I got home from school. He must have been thinking about the licking I got from the principal, because I had only been working a little while when he said, "You're getting to be quite a man now, son. You're well past 11 years old, and you can do quite a few things better than many good men. I'm going to treat you like a man from now on. I'm never going to spank you again or scold you for little things. And someday it's going to be Moody and Sons, building contractors." That's the end of chapter 30. Only one chapter left. We'll have to read it next time. Bye for now.